content on this platform, including all WeedSmart Extension products, podcasts, articles, webinars, and social media, is provided by WeedSmart for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice specific to your farming system. Always seek advice from your agronomist or other qualified providers with any questions you may have regarding specifics around herbicide use and integrating weed management into your farm system.
Hello, my name is Emily Chambers. I'm a Southern Extension Agronomist for WeedSmart, and today I'm joined with Pete Newman, an Extension Agronomist in the West, and today we're talking about windrow burning. So not necessarily a new practice for all of us, but something that in my region, at least in SA, we haven't done so much in recent years. But the weed seed bank that we're having with ryegrass has become quite an issue, and it's just another tactic to incorporate into our weed management plan to get down on weed seed numbers. So we're just looking at a bit of a refresher today. So Pete, I thought we'd start off with, how does narrow windrow burning incorporate into our, I guess, wider integrated weed management plan?
Yeah, hi Emily. Well, it is just another one of our forms of harvest weed seed control, and no, we haven't done it much in Western Australia either for a few years. There's a little bit of it done around the place, but narrow windrow burning was the main harvest weed seed control tool in the early 2000s, and in more recent years it's been taken over by the mills and maybe the chaff decks and a bit of chaff lining and chaff carts. But windrow burning, yeah, is out of favour. But I guess it's that thing that's really easy to just implement and you don't have to do it over the whole farm. So people can build a windrow burning chute for their harvester and just go and at low cost and get into it for that percentage of their program. So whereas if you're obviously investing in a mill or chaff decks or a chaff cart or something like that, there's a bigger capital outlay, and so that's more inclined to be where people are looking where they've got problems over the whole farm and they need to do it every paddock every year. Whereas narrow windrow burning can be something that's used a bit more tactically, I guess, at low capital cost.
Yeah, no, that's a great tool to keep in the belt, and I guess especially as our late season weed control is coming under more pressure recently with, I guess, resistance and potentially even label changes to, products like paraquat. I guess it might come into focus a little bit more as our sort of desiccating and crop topping timing of weed control might come under pressure. But yeah, that's a great sort of background and tie into harvest weed seed control.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, people can react quickly. Obviously, if you're going to go to a mill or something, you need to get ready ahead of time, but it could be pretty late in the season. It could be September, October, and you go, hang on, I've got a problem in these paddocks here. I'm really going to have to do something about my weed seeds this harvest. Let's quickly get into it. Let's build a windrow chute in the shed right now and get into it for those paddocks and be able to react quickly.
Which weeds are best to target with narrow windrow burning? Is there a difference between them all, or any different considerations that we might have for different weed seeds?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's like all the other harvest weed seed control tools. It's how many weed seeds you can get in the front of the harvester to start with. And so annual ryegrass and wild radish have been two of our big targets. But we are also seeing, there's other weeds like brome grass and even wild oats where we can in certain circumstances get a lot of weeds in the front. They're probably less reliable, those other weeds. Sometimes you get them in the front of the harvester, other times you don't. But I'm going to share my screen, Emily, because that's probably the first thing to think about is what are the burning temperatures of our weeds. And I've pulled out some old slides here, like this has been a little while since we've talked about this stuff. Presentation I gave at the crop updates in Perth, I reckon in 2010. And I will get to why the answer, my friend, is to burn in light wind in a moment. In terms of the weed species, there's some differences in burning temperature required to kill the seeds. And so annual ryegrass, we know, and this is through work that Michael Walsh did years ago by just putting weed seeds in an oven for certain amounts of time. 400 degrees for 10 seconds is enough to kill annual ryegrass, but it takes 30 seconds to kill wild radish. And I don't have the data for all the other weeds, but weed seeds that with a sort of harder coat and so on, I would assume are a little bit harder to kill. And so we need to get the temperature hot right at the soil surface for a longer period of time to kill some of those harder to control weeds like wild radish. And so this is some some burning data that Mike Walsh collected. So the solid line was just a normal standing stubble burn, and there was 6 tonnes per hectare of stubble. This thick dotted line here is where there was just a wide conventional windrow, he called it, something that's like 1.5 metres wide. So this is the burning temperature on this axis and the amount of time on this axis, on the horizontal axis here. And then the narrow windrow, this is the temperature. So you can see here in just a normal stubble burn, the temperature got to 300 degrees and only stayed there very briefly and then dropped back down again. And whereas in either of the windrows, but particularly the narrow windrow, it stayed really hot for a really long time. So what is that? That's like 20 minutes staying really, really hot, whereas we just need it for 30 seconds. So the point being, and we do see this, if we just burn a stubble, just a standing stubble, it can be enough to get a reasonable kill on ryegrass, 70-80%. But wild radish, it might only be like a 10% kill. And I would guess there's some other weed seeds that are a bit harder to kill as well. So that's probably one of the main points of narrow windrow burning. It's a way of getting the fire to stay really hot for a really long time so that we can kill the harder to kill weed seeds.
Yeah, that's excellent information to have and something to keep in mind when we're thinking about what we're targeting with our narrow windrow burning, that if it is that radish that needs to be a sustained high temperature. That's really great information. What other critical success factors, I guess, do we have for narrow windrow burning aside from the temperature and duration of that temperature?
Well, there's the width of the windrow, and as you can see, it's an old presentation. These are some older harvesters, but it is getting that windrow into that chute there. The opening at the bottom of that chute is 500 mil. And that makes a windrow that is 600 to 700 mil wide, and getting them in nice and tight and narrow is the key. So that just enables those temperatures to be hot for a long period of time. The other one, which I don't have a photo of, is harvesting at beer can height. Harvesting really low, that does 2 things. It gets the weed seeds in the front of the harvester, but also leaves that surrounding stubble really short, so that we can burn the windrow and not the whole paddock. But then that's another critical factor. So I've got my tips for young players here. You can see that we started talking about harvesting up and back. I mean, there's not too many people harvesting around and round now. So that's how old this presentation is. That 600 to 700 mil wide windrow. They burn the outside 2 laps first. That's just a way of sort of creating a fire break in the paddock. I guess another critical thing is if we're talking cereals, we really are talking about a 2.5 tons cereal crop at the most, because you're just risking burning the whole paddock if you go to some higher yielding cereals. People have been successful in sort of 3-ton wheat crops, but barley is really hard. Barley is very leafy, and barley fires will get away from you. And then that thing about burning, these are some burning tips, but not just success factors, but burning with a crosswind is the trick. Burning into the wind is good, but it can take days, literally 2 or 3 days, to get from one end of the paddock to the other. So burning with that light crosswind, you can light them up in multiple spots and they'll burn and get that fire hot all the way to the ground. But I think, Emily, you were talking about canola and about many people are direct harvesting now, where we used to swath canola, and maybe that's a reason why windrow burning has been out of favour.
Yeah, well, in South Australia now, at least with canola, it used to probably be windrowed before harvesting a lot more. Now we more so direct head, and yeah, just probably, I guess, the suitability of narrow windrow burning in canola, whether it was actually windrowed before harvest or it was direct headed. Probably a bit of, I guess, anecdotal evidence suggests that it was perhaps a bit more effective to be narrow windrow burning canola that had been windrowed before harvest, just to sort of, I guess, get the weed seeds all in one spot together at a good height, that you were getting as many weed seeds as possible and before they, were further mature. But yeah, in SA, I guess, so we are direct heading more. It has probably become a bit of a dying art. But I guess that's not to necessarily say that we can't narrow windrow burn with direct-headed canola stubble. Is that correct, Pete?
Yeah, we can, but I guess we're just worrying about the efficacy. So if we have direct-headed, obviously the harvester is obviously often quite high, so you're not getting as much ryegrass into the front. It's a bit later, so some of the weeds would have had that opportunity to shed or lodge, more so lodge, fall down on the ground. But the thing about canola and lupins, and probably some of the other pulses as well, it's easy to burn without burning the whole paddock. So we used to talk a lot about burn your lupin and canola windrows and don't worry about your high yielding wheat. But the point is that if you're direct heading, there might not be much point in making windrows in canola because we're just not getting the weeds into that windrow.
Yeah, and I guess that's the critical bit with this, is that the only weeds that you're going to, get control of or kill those seeds are going to be the ones that are in the windrow. So a very important point to keep in mind.
That's right. A weed like wild radish, though, in canola can be effective because that's a big, it's like as big as a canola plant kind of thing, isn't it? So you can get wild radish into a harvester when you are direct harvesting canola. But ryegrass and the other grasses are probably getting less into the front of the canola when direct harvesting canola. And you'll see there that I've written that you can burn lupin and canola windrows with the wind. That's just because you can light them up and let them go with the wind, and they will, they won't burn the whole paddock. Some farmers would say, "Oh, but they burn across the top of the windrow." I think that happens when there's no wind. Sometimes when there's no wind, the fire sort of burns and smothers itself out. If there's a bit of wind, the wind keeps blowing on the embers and it gets hot all the way to the soil surface where the weed seeds are. So, but that's kind of the point. Lupin and canola can be, or probably other legumes as well, can be easy to burn without burning the paddock, but we just got to then think about what efficacy are we getting. So
yeah, definitely. Probably, I guess, to add as well, another South Australian perspective is that we have, so many lentils in our rotation as well, that's for us another crop that we would potentially take the opportunity to narrow windrow burn. It's not, I guess, got the considerations of the cereals where it might be a risk of, taking off and burning the whole paddock. And lentils in our rotation are a really important part of particularly ryegrass control that, as we develop more resistance to our in-crop sprays, to our sort of clethodims, and even potentially our desiccation sprays becoming, less effective, it's something that we look into with lentils as well. So yeah, it's probably a bit of a different thing to the other states, but it's another opportunity in SA that we have to, get on top of our ryegrass seed.
So do you think lentils will be a crop they might do a bit of windrow burning in?
I think that really it's an opportunity in many people's rotation. They probably don't actually have canola. I guess they could with wheat, but I guess a lot of the areas that are growing lentils also have quite, high stubble loads in their wheat, that lentils probably are the opportunity in the rotation to narrow windrow burn. So I guess the consideration though with lentils is that we don't have as high of a stubble load, that it's still really critical that we get that high temperature. As Pete said, we're wanting 400 degrees for 10 seconds at least for ryegrass control. A critical consideration, I guess, with the lentils is to actually make sure that those narrow windrows are particularly narrow so that we can get that high temperature and get the weed seed control. Would you have any, I guess, tips, Pete, on exactly how narrow or how we guess can make those modifications that we might not be thinking with canola?
Yeah, so that windrow chute that I showed was 500 mil opening. If it was just 400 mil wide opening, that would narrow the windrow down. And then if you were to burn the lentil windrows, then you'd get those temperatures and you'd keep the fire going. I think, having said that, though, a key consideration is fire risk at harvest, and lentils have the lowest temperature flash point. I think it's like 160 degrees, and farmers are always nervous about fires when they are harvesting lentils. And if we do put some restriction on the back of the harvester, we might be increasing that fire risk. So that's a key consideration. That would take some grower experience to know whether they're taking extra fire risk at harvest. Yeah, so that's probably something to consider with lentils. I know with our lupins are can be are a higher fire risk that when we're harvesting them in Western Australia. Plenty of growers of narrow windrow burnt lupins. It's just they have to be pretty careful and pretty particular about the dust build up on the back of the machines when they're making narrow windrows.
So, Pete, I want to sort of switch tacks, I guess, to thinking about the time between harvest and when we might be burning. If there's potentially any summer rain that falls, in that time, and what the considerations might be when we're burning with moisture, if there's even any different things with what we might be needing to think of with wind conditions.
Yeah, it's a good question. So typically what happens is we're harvesting, say, November, December mostly, and then we are leaving that windrow burning as late as possible. Obviously, there's burning restrictions for several months, but also you want to, if you do have a fire getaway, you want to have that happen just before seeding. You don't want to have that happen a month before seeding. So we're leaving our windrow burn until pretty late, which obviously leaves it exposed to, so that might be March, April. Unfortunately, it's Easter holidays. Is some people's Easter holidays used to be out burning windrows. So we are leaving it late, but you can get rainfall. So I remember I had just done a heap of extension with Mike Walsh about windrow burning. We had thousands and thousands of hectares of windrows out there for the first time. It was early 2000s, and we got this huge summer rain. And I thought, I've got to go into hiding. I'm going to get lynched here. These windrows aren't going to burn. There's going to be a lot of problems. And then I wasn't hearing a lot of problems. And I got talking to the growers afterwards, and they said, no, they were fine. We just left them for a while, and they actually burnt really well because they sort of compacted down with the rain, and there was less risk of the fire getting away in the rest of the paddock because it was a bit damp, and the rain had sort of settled the stubble down a bit and so on. And then there was a bit of research done here. I'll just show you some slides, which Mike Walsh and Vanessa Stewart, looking at so we had some no rain, so they used some tarpaulins, I think, to stop the windrows getting wet, and obviously they did get hotter for longer. And then they had a 15, 22 or 29 delay between the rain and burning the windrows, and they actually didn't find a huge difference between them. And you can see that the windrows did get hot enough for long enough. So this one here, the green one, which is 29 days, funnily enough, was only 300 degrees, but it was for a really long time. So that's going to kill the weed seeds. And the other windrows did get hot enough. And just from my experience over those years, it did work well. There are times when you get a summer rain, but then it keeps raining and raining and raining, and the windrow itself is just too wet to physically burn, and you just don't get that opportunity. You can get a bit of a mess with that in some high rainfall areas. So, but if you get that rain and then you get a couple of weeks for it to dry out enough and burn, then it's fine. Also, the wind, you want to, like that message of the answer, my friend, is to burn in light wind. You want to have some wind on the windrows when you're burning them, particularly if they've been damp, just to keep that wind fueling the fire. Those embers just keep glowing and smouldering for 20 minutes or so. I've got some slides here where this is how we did the windrow burning. So I had a few different things set up. I've got an anemometer on the ground there and a wind direction thing, and I got the leaf blower out, borrowed it from the gardener at the ag department there where I was working at the time, and we put the leaf blower on compared to parking the ute next to it with tarpaulin and whatever to block the wind and then have normal amount of wind. So we managed to measure a few different wind speeds. And this one here is actually the one where often you'll burn the top, but it just doesn't burn to the ground because the fire sort of just burns the top and then puts itself out. So whenever there's a bit of wind, that's the key to getting them to burn all the way to the ground.
Yeah, wow. That's great to keep in mind as we're potentially considering burning. Just probably on the same sort of line of thought with potential summer rain, how does having windrows in our paddock actually potentially impact summer weed control? are we, is it fine to still be spraying over them? Are we likely to still get summer weeds pop up through the windrows and potentially even have green material while we're trying to burn? Or is there any sort of things that we think of with summer weed control and narrow windrows?
You generally see a lot of weeds in general germinating on the edge of the windrows, not much in the middle of the windrow. And then the windrow is this beautiful big mat of chaff mulch, and you'll find that there's moisture conservation under the windrow, and then you'll burn it, and sometimes you'll see the paddock and only the windrows come up because there was moisture there, but it had dried out in the rest of the paddock. Yeah, not so many big summer weed control issues. You can just spray over the top of them, so not big problems. And in terms of our pre-em herbicides, not big problems there either. Everyone's worried about herbicides binding to carbon, which is a thing, but we actually, when we burn stuff in a lot of air, we actually get ash, not so much carbon. To make biochar, they burn wood and stuff in low oxygen environments, and that makes char, and that is what would tie up herbicides and so on. But when you burn, when you've got a lot of air, you actually make ash, and it actually doesn't tie up the herbicides much at all. So generally, you don't really want to burn and then be spraying herbicides the next day, but people have been doing that. But generally you just leave it for a little short period of time.
Yeah, oh, that's good to know. That was definitely one of my sort of lines of thoughts was, are we still getting good pre-em efficacy? Because if we are narrow windrow burning, it's probably for a reason. We still want those pre-ems to work in those areas that were burnt. But that's good to know that the ash doesn't really, I guess, intercept herbicides and tie up in the same way that carbon might. So that's good to keep in mind. I just had another sort of thought, I guess, with management of a paddock between harvest and potentially burning is that I guess if we have stock, it's probably ideal to keep them off paddocks that have the windrows, just when we're wanting to keep them, I guess, as narrow as possible, keep all the weed seeds where they are. We don't really want them to be disturbed and shake off or anything like that. It's probably a key to keep stock off paddocks until we've burnt, and then just to get, I guess, best control we can with the windrows. Would you agree, Pete, in your area as well?
Yeah, it's a good point. We say that a light graze is okay. But grazing for too long, they can spread the windrows out, and so you don't have that biomass there to get the good hot fire. But also they can put in lots of little fire breaks across the windrows, and then you just got to light them up in so many spots to get them that people end up driving up and down and lighting the whole windrow. It takes a long time to light them up, whereas otherwise they might just light them every 200 or 300 metres and let the windrow come together. So a light graze is okay, but if you overdo it, you'll mess the windrows up too much.
Yeah, definitely. Good to keep in mind. Do we have any other resources that we could point people towards if they're wanting a bit more information on narrow windrow burning?
There's another whole aspect to this whole thing that we do have resources on the WeedSmart website, but the cost of it is another thing. And so on face value, it looks very cheap because you just got to knock up a windrow chute in the shed and spend a bit of time burning windrows. That's the cost. But there's also a nutrition cost as well. So when you burn the windrows, the nitrogen goes up in smoke, but the potassium stays behind. Your South Australian soil is not so potassium hungry. Our sand plain soils here very potassium hungry, and so what we end up doing is concentrating there's a lot of potassium in straw, and so we end up concentrating potassium into the windrow strips. And so there's a calculator on the WeedSmart website that looks at the cost of the different harvest weed seed control tools, and that takes the nutrition side of it into account as well. The other big thing, Emily, at the moment is, as I've shown you, they were old pictures of old harvesters. And so how do you make a windrow chute for these new harvesters? And I know that the Messinas who designed one of those windrow chutes that we saw there on the red machine, they still use very much the same chute on their newer case harvesters. So I know that works pretty well. But I don't know about the other machines. So there'd be a bit of engineering to be done to work out how do you disengage the chopper, how do you make a chute that fits the different machines. And so if people are getting into windrow burning, I mean, farmers are expert at that. They're just very good at it.
Yeah.
I guess I just encourage them. They always want to leave the back of the windrow chute open. You want to have it to be able to be cleared. And there's also a very important rule. If you're harvesting with a windrow chute on, don't stop.
Okay.
If you stop,
Yeah,
you've either got to pull out of the crop or you've got to back up. So people will learn that one the hard way, making a hay bale. But yeah, there's a bit of engineering to be done. It was a classic. We laughed the other day that Greg Condon had someone call up and say, how do I make a windrow chute for a John Deere X9? And it's sort of, you know, different practices from different eras, isn't it? A new modern harvester with an old windrow chute is something that we hadn't considered. So there's some engineering considerations too.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like a good opportunity for some grower to grower learning and support there. But yeah, that sounds, a really great summary and review, I guess, of some of the things that we want to think about when we're narrow windrow burning and how to get, I guess, the best success so we can actually draw down on that weed seed bank. So thank you for joining me today, Pete. Hopefully that's been useful for people today, and happy and safe burning.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, it's just been a bit of a recap. We're not expecting a huge uptake of it, but we have had some interest from some growers that are going to have a bit of a go. So, yeah, give us a call. There's obviously a lot of old heads, and there's some very experienced windrow burning growers, particularly in Western Australia, but all over the country. So the knowledge is still there. I'm sure we can share it around and work it out if people want to go down that path, particularly if they're just reacting quickly to a problem at the end of the season, like we discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Emily.